Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question was suggested by a viewer. Thanks to WWZack16 for this one. Amy plays a Glimpse the Unthinkable against Nick, and the third card that Nick flips over is a Worldspine Wurm. At what point is Worldspine Wurm shuffled back into Nick's library? Is it possible for Nick to mill the same Worldspine Wurm twice with this Glimpse the Unthinkable? Alright, so usually if I was going to answer this question, I would say that the thing that shuffles Worldspine Wurm back into your library is a triggered ability. You can tell it's a triggered ability because it uses the word win. And the thing about triggered abilities is that they can trigger during the resolution of a spell or another ability, but they don't actually get put onto the stack until after all steps in the resolution of that spell or ability have been completed. So using that logic, we can see the answer to this question is that it is not possible for the Worldspine Wurm to get milled twice with the same Glimpse the Unthinkable, because the triggered ability that shuffles it back into your deck doesn't even get put onto the stack until after all 10 cards from the Glimpse the Unthinkable have been put into your graveyard. And this is a pretty good way to answer that question. It even gets us all the way through the answer to the first alternate scenario that I'd come up with, that being what would happen if we had an Emrakul, the Aeons Torn, rather than a Worldspine Wurm. And you can see, using the same sort of logic, that the Emrakul gets put into your graveyard and the triggered ability triggers, but the triggered ability doesn't get put onto the stack until after all 10 cards that are being milled with this Glimpse the Unthinkable get put into the graveyard also. And so that means that no matter where the Emrakul is in those 10 cards, it's always going to shuffle your entire graveyard, including all 10 of the cards that were milled with Glimpse the Unthinkable, back when its triggered ability resolves. And so that's pretty good, and it gets us through those two questions really well. But I want to introduce another, more powerful way to answer this question that will also help us out in the third scenario that I wanted to consider. That being, what would happen if we had a Progenitus rather than an Emrakul? Would it be possible to mill a Progenitus twice with the same Glimpse the Unthinkable? And in order to answer this question, it looks like we're going to need something completely new. The Progenitus has a replacement effect that replaces getting put into the graveyard with shuffling back into your library. And the thing about replacement effects is that they don't use the stack at all. So it doesn't matter that we're in the middle of resolving the Glimpse the Unthinkable, the Progenitus' replacement effect is able to modify the resolution of spells and abilities to something completely different. So at least in principle, it still should be possible, based on what we've talked about so far. However, the thing that we're going to need in order to answer this question would be this other piece of information about how spells and abilities resolve. Notice that the Glimpse the Unthinkable only uses the word mill one time. That means that we're putting all 10 of those cards into your graveyard all at once as part of the same game action. And so, contrary to what usually physically happens when people play a Glimpse the Unthinkable, we don't actually reveal the top card of our library and then put it into the graveyard and then repeat for 9 more cards. What we actually are officially doing, according to the comprehensive rules, is we're taking the top 10 cards off of our library, revealing all of them, and then putting all of them into the graveyard all at the same time. Now, you'll notice that I was really careful to say that we reveal all of them before we put them into the graveyard, and it turns out that that's for a very good reason that's relevant to this question here. You see, that's actually part of the official steps of what happens whenever any object changes zones, and we can see exactly why if we take a look at the Progenitus again. Think about what would happen if we tried to put the object straight from the library into the graveyard without revealing them first. You see, the Progenitus has a replacement effect, which means that we're completely replacing the event of Progenitus goes to the graveyard with Progenitus gets shuffled back into the library. So what that means is that the Progenitus has a replacement effect, and if that replacement effect is applied properly, there's never a time when the Progenitus is in the graveyard. And that's the only time when the opponent would be able to look at it. Obviously, your opponent can't look at cards that are in your library. So if you were to apply this replacement effect, then how would your opponent know that you had something that was telling you to shuffle a card back into your library? You would have to reveal the Progenitus somehow or some way, and this is the reason why the cards get revealed as they move from zone to zone. All the players get to check to see if they have any effects that might affect the move as part of that process. And so that's one point that I wanted to bring up with this question. Of course, thinking about things in terms of what I just said, it makes it pretty clear that you are not able to double shuffle the same Progenitus into your library twice with the same Glimpse the Unthinkable either. The reason for it this time is because when we mill 10 cards, we count out those 10 cards, and at that point, we're set in stone. All 10 cards that are going to get milled are already locked in, and so it doesn't matter that the Progenitus is going to replace getting milled with something different. That doesn't mean that any of the other 9 cards could then later on be that Progenitus, because we had already locked in what those 9 other cards are going to be. So it's not possible to double mill any kind of card with a Glimpse the Unthinkable anyway. Alright, now there is one other thing that I wanted to mention before I sign off here, and that would be the case of what would happen if your library had less than 10 cards in it. And so if you had 9 cards in your library, for example, with the Glimpse the Unthinkable, then that's going to change absolutely nothing about any of the answers that I've just given you. All of that stuff applies exactly the same way, and the reason is because if the game doesn't have enough cards in the library to complete a mill instruction successfully, it just does as much as is possible, and calls that good enough. So the game isn't going to mill 9 cards and then shuffle the Emrakul and friends back in, and then mill 1 more card just to complete things out. The game just doesn't work that way. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.